Good morning, everyone. I'm Mike McDonald, a product manager on the Firebase team, and I'm presenting with my coworker, Jacob Wenger, a software engineer also on the Firebase team. As you saw in the last presentation, Fontaine had this amazing application that she was able to gather tremendous insights about user acquisition, retention, and value. But how do you make one of those applications? How do you store level information and progress in the application? So when you get home from this conference and your boss and your team asks you, what did you learn? How can we go ahead and have $60 per user per month acquisition? Firebase is the answer. Typically, when you build a mobile application, you build something that looks like this. You have a mobile client that makes RESTful requests to an application server. And that application server may be a Ruby on Rails app or a Node.js and Express app. And that server handles authentication, authorization, and your app's business logic. Your clients are dumb. They're talking to a server which contains all of the smarts. You'll also need to store application data and user data, so your server has to talk to a database. That could be MySQL, Mongo, Postgres, something like that. But when you need to quickly develop applications, you're going to spend a majority of your time writing middleware on your server and database code. And that doesn't benefit your users. You also haven't solved a lot of really difficult problems on mobile apps. What happens if the app is online? Does it still function? Can people game while in the subway when they don't have cell signal? And what about performance and scalability? If your team has a prototype that your users love, how quickly can you get it into production? Firebase helps you solve these problems. Firebase eliminates the application server and lets your mobile clients talk directly to powerful, managed infrastructure. We handle client-side authentication and authorization, so there's no need to implement your own OAuth or build application middleware. And Firebase is backed by Google technology, so it scales automatically. So the app that you build today can go into production next week. Firebase clients solve all of the hard pieces of application infrastructure, so your team can move quickly and focus on building apps that your users love. Let's see how this works in practice. We have a number of different developer primitives that allow you to store and synchronize data in real time using the Firebase real-time database, a highly scalable file storage solution that lets you upload petabytes of user-generated content, and lastly, a static content hosting solution that lets you deploy a website behind a CDN with an SSL cert for free and in minutes. Now, Jacob and I want to go ahead and build an app to showcase all of the amazing sites that we've seen while we're in Seoul. And we want to go ahead and be able to share that with you. So let's see how Jacob and I can build that application in the next 10 minutes. We'll start with the real-time database. We need to be able to store username and messages while we chat and while we chat with you about our trip. More importantly, not only do we need to store that data, we need to quickly retrieve it and notify new users of messages as they come in. Luckily, Firebase has a solution for that. The Firebase real-time database was the first feature that Firebase built over 4 years ago. It's a cloud-hosted NoSQL JSON database, and it's a little different from the traditional application model. First of all, Firebase stores JSON data, which means that it's just a tree of values, as you can see. This allows for very flexible data modeling, and it's easily consumed by your application. Your application has probably dealt with REST and JSON before. So here's a data model that we'll use in our app today. You can see we have a chat node and several messages from different users that have a name and a message field. You can also query this data to get the last several messages or only message by a particular user. Another unique property of the Firebase real-time database is that you can synchronize data. Instead of going ahead and having your application poll your application server asking, do I have any new messages? Do I have any new messages? Where you're wasting battery life and your users' time, the Firebase real-time database lets you subscribe for notifications. So instead of polling, you can say, database, let me know when a value at a certain location changes, and we'll push that content to your users in milliseconds. This is the original magic of Firebase. We make building collaborative real-time applications effortless. We have a number of other really good high-quality resources on the real-time database, including our introduction videos, a deep dive video, and excellent developer documentation. Okay, Jacob and I are able to go ahead and communicate over text, but that's not quite cutting it. We've eaten a lot of amazing food here, and we need to take a picture and share that with all of our friends. Emojis just won't do. Again, Firebase has you covered. Firebase Storage lets you store files, such as images, video, or audio, and share them with other users quickly and easily. With Firebase Storage, you can select an image, set the file name, and upload it directly. And behind the scenes, Firebase uses Google Cloud Storage, which means you automatically get petabyte scale at a low price. It also means that you can integrate with other parts of the Google Cloud Platform, such as the Cloud Vision API, which can detect the difference between all of the food that I've eaten. And because Firebase Storage is part of the Firebase ecosystem, it integrates very nicely with Firebase Authentication and the Firebase Real-Time Database to allow you to store the files that you've stored in Firebase Storage with hundreds or millions of other mobile clients. In keeping with the tradition of Firebase handling difficult problems for you, we handle things like authentication and authorization out of the box. By default, we check if your users are logged in with Firebase Authentication, and you can also use Firebase storage security rules to provide authorization and access control to different files stored. So you can say only a particular user can read or write particular files, so they could have their own private data. Or you could also enforce size or time limitations. So you could build Snapchat on top of Firebase Storage without writing application middleware. And again, because Firebase wants to handle poor network connectivity, though I have not experienced that here, we continue uploads even if your internet cuts out. We'll go ahead, pause the upload, and resume it so that your users' files are uploaded quickly and easily. Again, if you want to learn more, we have a great intro video, a talk that we gave at I/O called Zero to App, where we go through all of these features in greater detail, and some more high-quality docs. But listening to me isn't going to help you build this app tonight or this weekend. Let's see how we can go ahead and implement it. Jacob?
Thanks, Mike. Now that you all know what the real-time database and Firebase storage are, let's go ahead and build an app together. So right here, I have an app called FireChat. It's very simple. Right now, you have a name input, so I can type in my name, and a message input. So I'll go ahead and say, hello, Sol. I click submit, and that message gets added to my page. Nothing crazy going on here, but it has a few limitations. If I go ahead and open up a new tab, you'll see that the message is not there because we're not synchronizing the data across tabs or across clients. Also, if I go ahead and refresh the page entirely, my message will disappear because we're not persisting the data anywhere. Let's go ahead and add the Firebase real-time database to this so that we can get it working and persisting data in real time. So here is what the app currently looks like. We have 3 files. We have an HTML file, a CSS file, and a JavaScript file. In our index.html, we include our dependencies at the top, and then we have a section for the new message panel, which holds the form with all of those inputs, and a panel for the message list. In our CSS, we have a couple different rules just to make things look a little prettier. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that for now. And then in our JavaScript is where we have the meat of all of our content. At the top, we get a reference to a bunch of different elements in our page using jQuery. We have a function called addMessage to HTML, which takes a name, text, and an image URL if we have one. And all it does is append an element to our message list. So this just updates our view. Then we have a click handler on our submit button. And when the submit button is clicked, we get the name, the new message, and the new file. and we go ahead and call add message to HTML, passing our name and new message, and we clear the new message input so that we can add a new message. So if we want to add Firebase to this, the first thing we need to do is actually create a Firebase project. And that's what we have here. I've already created one called gfm-chat. And on the left, you can see all of the different Firebase services. We're going to focus on the database and storage today. If you go over to the database tab, we'll see we have a data viewer here. And if we go ahead and refresh so that we can get our data to come in, we have a messages node with a random message ID, and then the name, Mike, and Mike is better at his Korean than I am, so the text there is going to be hello Seoul in Korean. So we'll wait for that to come back in. And then over here in our storage tab, we have, we'll see all of the files that are stored in Firebase storage. Currently, we haven't uploaded any files, so we're going to go ahead and hold off on that. So we know that our data is stored in this messages node, so let's go ahead and start using Firebase. The first thing we need to do is include our Firebase library. We can do that using a script tag and loading the latest version of Firebase right here. Then, if we head over to our JavaScript file, the first thing we need to do is initialize the Firebase SDK. Thankfully, there's a handy little initialization script that we have in the Firebase console. We can go ahead and copy-paste this into our app. All we're doing here is calling firebase.initializeApp and passing it a config object. This config object tells you where the data is going to be stored, in what bucket, and how to do the authentication. So we've initialized the SDK. The next thing we need to do is get a reference to different Firebase services. So we can call firebase.database to reference the database, and firebase.storage to reference the storage API. And both of them, we're going to store it in a messages node in our database and a messages directory in storage. The next thing we want to do is actually read from Firebase. So we're going to go get our database reference, get the last 10 messages, and listen on this onChildAdded event. This will fire for every message in our list. So for each message, we will call this callback function right here and get a snapshot of the data at that location. We can get the JSON representation by calling snapshot.val, and then we can call add message to HTML, passing the name, the text, and the download URL. So if we head over back to our app and we hit refresh, we should see, once the internet loads the data, we should see that our message is going to pop into view. There we go. So we got our message. The problem is that we still, when we write messages, we're not storing them back into Firebase. So let's go ahead and do that. Instead of just adding the message to the HTML when we click the submit button, let's go ahead and store that data back in Firebase. So we'll use this thing called push, and push just appends to our list. So we have a list of messages. We're going to call push to get a new message reference. And then we're going to call add message to Firebase database, passing that reference of where the data is going to be stored and the data to store. So the last thing we need to do here is actually define this add message to Firebase database function. And we're going to set, which does a write to Firebase, passing the name, the text, and the download URL. And if it's successful, clear our input so that we can send another message. And if it's unsuccessful, log an error. Now, if we head back here, hit refresh, and wait for the page to load, we can go ahead and type a new message. I will say, this city is beautiful. Click submit, and it's added to our view. And if we head over to our database, we'll see that the message was also added here. And if we go ahead and pull out this tab, so that we can refresh and get the data. And we set up a little conversation here. And I say, "Don't you think so, Mike?" And I click submit. You'll see that the data is added in real time to the other client. Even though this is on my computer, these could be halfway around the world. And all it took was just a few lines of code. The last thing we want to do is actually hook up the image input and add Firebase storage. So down here, we are always writing to the Firebase database, but let's go ahead and change this a little bit. Let's say if we don't have a new file, do what we did earlier, just add to the Firebase database. But if we do have a new file, call storage ref, go to the same location as our message is stored in the database, and call put, passing the new file. This will upload the file to Firebase storage and return us a snapshot of that file. We can get a publicly available download URL from the snapshot, and then we can add the message to the Firebase database, this time passing that download URL. And again, we'll add an error handler in case anything goes wrong. So we'll go ahead and refresh both of these. And Mike will say, here's a photo of the city. Choose the file. I'll grab a photo of Seoul that I already have, click submit, and now this file is being uploaded to to Firebase storage, and then we'll store the location of that file in the real-time database, and you'll see that the file shows up on both locations. And so in just a few lines of code, we added both the real-time database and storage to our app, and we have highly scalable services that will allow this to scale to thousands and millions of users. So if we head back to the slides now, we'll talk about one other thing that we want to do. So can we head back to the slides, please? So right now, this is only available on my local computer. But really what I want to do is actually make this publicly available to all of you so that all of you can actually play with this application. Thankfully, Firebase has a product called Firebase Hosting. Firebase Hosting is production-grade web hosting for developers. With Firebase Hosting, you can quickly and easily upload a web app or static content to a global content delivery network, a CDN, with just a single command. Firebase Hosting even will provision an SSL certificate on your behalf so that you can host your website on HTTPS by default. And if you want to host everything on a custom domain, we'll do that for you entirely for free. Firebase Hosting just requires 3 commands. So I'll walk through those right now. So I'll kill my local development server, and I'll go ahead and say Firebase init. This initializes my current directory so that I can deploy it to Firebase Hosting. So we're just going to be using hosting right now, so I'll hit enter. And now I need to pick the project that I want to deploy to. So I have GFM chat right there selected. The next thing I say is, what files do I want to deploy? Everything is in my local directory, so I'll just go ahead and say dot for current working directory. And then there's a bunch of defaults that we can use to bootstrap a new application. Since we've already written one, let's just go ahead and ignore all of those. So now my local directory is initialized with a couple new files. You'll see there's this Firebase RC file, which tells you what project I'm deploying to. In this case, it's going to be GFM chat. And then there's also a Firebase.json file, which tells you what directory you're going to deploy. There's a bunch of other options you can add here, like rewrite rules and redirects, but for now, we're just going to deploy a very basic app. The last thing I need to do is hit Firebase deploy. What this does is it takes my HTML, my CSS, and my JavaScript file, packages them all up locally, ships them to Firebase hosting, and then Firebase hosting sends them around the world to our global content delivery network and makes them available on the World Wide Web. So if I grab this location right here, hit enter, and now I'm at gfm-chat.firebaseapp.com, and it's hosted on HTTPS. You can see my app is now available, and all of you could go to this website right now and start using the app, and it looks like somebody already has. And you'll notice that the local version and the production version are staying in sync entirely. So we've hosted our app on Firebase hosting. We've integrated with the real-time database and with storage, and all it took was maybe 10 minutes of our time. So let's head back to the slides. And if you want to learn more about Firebase hosting, you can go ahead and go to our YouTube channel to see an introduction video. And we also have very good documentation explaining all of the rules that you can add for Firebase hosting. So I'll hand it back over to Mike, and he can close things up.
Thanks, Jacob. As you can see, by building your app with Firebase, you'll be able to save yourself and your team time and money. We built an entire application in about 15 minutes. So when your team asks you those really tough questions like, what happens when your app goes offline? How do you handle intermittent network? Will your application scale to production? You'll have a single answer: Firebase. With Firebase, your team is able to focus on building the amazing applications and features that your users love. The real-time database, Firebase storage, and Firebase hosting all work together in concert to help you make amazing applications. But the integration in Firebase doesn't end with our developed products. Firebase is fully integrated across develop, grow, and earn to help you develop your app, grow your user base, and earn more money. And because Firebase applications are backed by Google infrastructure, Firebase scales with you. So the app that you launch today scales as you grow. And if you need help along the way, Firebase has a number of other tools that help you develop extraordinary applications. We have high-quality developer documentation that walks you through installation and best practices. We have an integration with Android Studio that puts Firebase directly in your workflow, so you can copy and paste code snippets directly into your apps. And lastly, we have high-quality free and paid developer support. So if you have a question that the docs don't answer, have feature requests, or need something from our team, you can reach out, and we're happy to answer. We're also very active on Stack Overflow and our Google group. Thank you. And if you build something, we love to know what it is. Feel free to reach out to us on Twitter, on Google+. The Firebase and Google developers groups on Twitter are also very active. So thank you all very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
네, 제로투의 파이어베이스 데이터베이스, 스토리지, 호스팅에 대해서 얘기를 들어봤습니다.